All right, folks, part two of the trip. The trip, part two. West, finally. They was well on their way when Walter told them all not to get in too far into old McBrayer Jug, 'cause he knowed what could happen to a bunch of fellers. He said he was out with a bunch of the Britton boys there, with about 20 of them, you know, and all kin, but most was brothers, and the police done pulled them over. They was down in Turkey, Texas, down by Greenbelt Lake, where their annual motorcycle rally was held every year. Well, now, when the officer pulled them over, one of the Britton boys pulled on the officer's handcuffs and kind of like made him stumble like getting out of his car. Oh, thought it was real funny. Now he was fit to be tied and hauled them all into the jail. Since they made a right smart amount of money with arresting the motorcycle riders in town every year, the jails weren't big enough to hold all the boys they arrested. So they used the gymnasium at the schoolhouse for a temporary jailhouse. Used plastic cuffs and set them down every which place. Walter done found out if you pled guilty, the judge would let you go if you emptied all your pockets and your billfold, and whatever amount you had was your fine. Well, old George Britton was drunker than a skunk and a cooter brown to boot, and he got before the judge and said he was not guilty. Walter and the boys see they was taking George off to the big house and hollered for him to plead guilty. Well, George went to a hollering, "Guilty, guilty of sin, Judge, guilty." The officer turned George around to the judge, and George give the judge all he had. Now, Manley was just about 3 sheets to the wind, and they done give him the breath test. He didn't pass, I tell you. This was going to be the ruination of Manley, 'cause he was a schooling to be a pharmacist. There was a Texas State Trooper there from their hometown of Groom that knowed all the boys, and he told the judge he needed to test Manley again, as there was something that went wrong the first time. Well, he tested old Manley, and he come back in and told the judge he was okay, and they let him go too. Well, Manley sure enough owes that trooper for letting him off and letting him get to making a life as a pharmacist, 'cause he couldn't have got into pharmacy school with a drinking fine on his record. Well, anyhow, Walter said when he come up before the judge and emptied his pockets and billfold, he only had 58 cents on his person. Cheapest fine he ever got, he said. Oh, that Walter. I declare that boy could wiggle his way out of anything. Told you he had a sweet talking way. Just ask Lou Ann next time you see her. Well, they told him they didn't have no problem with a snort or two, but none of them was into liquor real heavy, and they'd be a sightful careful on the trip. Well, map reading weren't no calling for none of the boys, but if any one of them wanted to stop and take a look-see, they could, and they did. Most times it was Jesse that wanted to stop and look at something, though, and Walter would chime right in and said he wanted to look too. They was all having fun and enjoying their trip to a stop here and there wasn't nothing to any of them. So when Jesse and Walter piped up and wanted to go up to that snow mountain where they was a skiing, wouldn't do not to go there unless they'd had his fit. When they got to the place where you'd get to go up to the mountain, Buster told him he was going to sit for a spell and enjoy the scenery and have him some hot chocolate. To tell the truth, he done seed where and how they'd have to get up to the top of that there mountain, and he wasn't going to have no part in it. He didn't cotton no heights neither. Well, I done found where to ride one of them snowmobiles and told the feller he wanted the fastest one he had. Walter and Jesse thought it'd be something to try too, so they said they wanted to rent one, but didn't have to be no fasting for them. Boy, those boys just didn't know what they done let theirselves in for, I tell you. Buster seated all a coming. Not none of him, he said to himself. The boys had to ride this confounded contraption to the top of the mountain. The feller renting it said. Now, little Jesse was plumb skittish about heights too, but since he was a-riding with Walter as big as he is, he figured it'd be okay. Of course, Hired couldn't wait and took off on his own to the top. Well, this contraption to sit on come up behind Walter and Jesse, and Walter just plunked old Jesse in the seat with him hanging on for dear life. Well, Hired was already at the top of watching all the goings on and wondering what all the fuss was all about. He done rode that mountain in places so steep it doubled back on itself. Well, Hired let that machine fly, don't you know. Just as you thought he'd crash and burn and have that thing come back on him, he'd fling himself and the machine over the lip of the mountain just a kicking up the stoke. Hired really could ride, I tell you. It was a thing of pure beauty to see how Hired could handle a machine like that. Any kind of machine. Be it motorcycle or four-wheeler or snowmobile or jet ski or any kind of heavy equipment. He'd take off up a hill straight down a sliding or whatever with the excavator and never think nothing about it. Been doing it since he was a pup. Remember me telling you about him putting it on that boxcar when the boys had all their little place up there for the boys they was camping out and whatnot. Up or down didn't make no never mind to him. Well, that thing cranked right on up the mountain, and when old Jesse looked down, he pert near fainted. Walter was just having himself a ball and didn't pay no mind to Jesse. Now, after a hair-raising ride, according to Jesse, they come to the top. Walter done lifted up this here bar that holds you in, and Jesse about had a heart attack. He done grabbed his chest and balled up on Walter, looking as green as a gourd. Oh, folks. Now, that contraption just didn't stop but kept on going, so Walter had to grab a hold of Jesse and pull him off and away from the front of the thing. Well, Jesse was limp as a dish rag by them and couldn't even catch his breath, let alone talk. Well, Hired run up to see if he could help and told him, too, it was about the funniest thing he ever did see, and it's quite a spell. Walter just looked at him and grinned, but Jesse wasn't in no mood for funning, I tell you. Well, after Jesse got his bearings and all, the feller that rented them machines come up and says to saddle up for the ride. He give the boys instructions on how to operate the machines, but Hired done figured it all out by then. All of them took on off, and after a bit everybody got used to riding the machines and was having a high old time. The snow was elbow deep to a tall Indian, and it was colder than that where a well digger you was always hearing about would have to holler. But talk about a view. It was a picture perfect that you ever seen, and the air was clean, pure, crisp, and right fresh. They all was a-doing fine till Jesse come a little close to the edge once or twice, but he hung in there as long as he didn't look down. Well, finally they come towards the end of the ride, and the feller a-guiding them said they was going to have to ride that contraption back down the machine. Now, Jesse just wasn't going to have none of that, I'm a-telling you, that's for sure. Well, I guess he got his wish, because the feller said the contraption done broke down, and they had to ride the machines down. First time that ever happened, he said he knowed of. Well, they all mounted back up and rode on down for a piece, and the feller told them that was where they'd have to go down, that spot. Well, Jesse done took one look and said, no way am I going to go down that there hill, and ain't nobody can make me. Well, the guide feller says to Jesse to hop on the back of his'n and he'd take him on down. Well, Walter and Jesse was a-sitting side by side looking down that hill and knowed it was going to be one heck of a thrilling ride if they wasn't killed or hurt bad. Well, Jesse up and says he was going to do it too, and the feller says to follow in his tracks. That was a guiding him, you know. Now that jump off, right from the start, sure enough took your breath away, and they told later there wasn't no stopping once you lit out for the bottom. Now Jesse's machine was a-sliding and a-twisting and turning, and he said once he figured out how to track that thing, weren't too bad. Well, all of them got back safe and sound, and Buster had him a ringside seat and seated off. Come to find out, that hill was called a 4 Black Diamond Hill for the most experienced skiers. Ain't no snowmobile supposed to go down at the top. Well, when they got off and put up their gear and That guide feller told Jesse that was one fine piece of riding he done, and he ain't never seen no better, experienced rider or not. Well, old Jesse was as proud as Punch, and a grin as wide as the Grand Canyon was spread across his face. They had his picture took to show all the folks back home 'cause they wouldn't believe nothing. Well, Buster took all of them into the restaurant there and bought them some good grub to eat and some really good hot chocolate. After that, it was getting on to dark, so the boys loaded up and found the town, Sandpoint. It looked for a place to bed down for the night. That was at Sandpoint, Idaho, folks. They was a driving around and see the sign for a boarding house, and as tired as they was, they decided to spend a little more hard cash for a good bed and breakfast victuals. When they got to the lane at Anderson's boarding house, they parked the Ford close by, as the boys was a mite stove up after all that riding and coming down that hell-bent for Leather Hill. Well, old Buster knocked up on the door, and it was answered by a real pretty lady. She had the biggest and warmest smile you ever did see and invited the boys on in. Told them she had plenty of room and give them all her own bedsteads for the night. Well, Jesse got himself a place off to the side. It was an apartment-like kind of affair. Walter and Hired got the bottom floor that was as big as a house of its own. Well, Buster got a master room at ground level, seeing he was the biggest and needed a sturdy bed frame to hold him up. 'Twarn't no corn shucks in them mattresses, nor ropes for springs neither. Felt like you was on a cloud in them feather beds. Well, the boys slept in the next morning, and breakfast was awaiting for 'em when they got up. The lady of the house was Mrs. Anderson, and told them all to call her Millie, but the boys couldn't rightly do that, as she was a married-up woman and mother of 3 young'uns. Well, her husband was a veterinarian, and Hired stuck to him like glue, and him and Mr. Anderson took a shine to each other, and right quick, too. There was another woman standing there, and she was quite fetching herself as she sidled up to old Jesse and batted those big old brown eyes at him the whole time they was there. "It's them pheromones of yourn, Jesse," said Buster. "Lots to be said for an older woman," they told Jesse, but he said not to be funning him none about it. But if she and Mae West could have been sisters the way they got built, that's for sure. Well, anyhow, Walter got on out to the stables and checked out the horses and other stock and visited Mr. Anderson too. Well, Buster sat a good spell and talked to Ms. Anderson about every which thing. Told him all about the town and folk and what all was happening there, and where her people was from in India. The lady sure was a beautiful woman, and it was her personality that really made her beauty great inside and out. Figured Mr. Anderson was a lucky man at that. And all them young'uns was smart. She was American all right, but Indian too. Now, not the kind there was here in the USA, but the foreign kind from India. Told Buster lots about that place, you know. Their young'uns, as I say, was smart as a whip, and that little gal of theirs was a spitting image of her ma, with helping folks in foreign lands and folks around there too. They had a right nice place, and the food was real good too. Buster ate everything she put in front of him and sopped up his gravy with homemade biscuits and got fuller than a goose in a corn crib. Well, Buster had him a shock or two with all manner of critters in the house. Oh, me. I know you folks don't want to believe this, but it's true. Whilst Buster was a-fixin' to eat a bite, this dang goat jumped up on a chair beside him, butted him a little, and was ready to be fed. Dangest thing he ever saw. That goat was just like a member of the family. And whenever the goat got cold, he'd hunker up close to the fire to get warm. Trouble was, he'd catch his and hide the fire when he got too close and never even knowed it. You had to watch out for his fur burning and put him out. I guess he was dumber than 2 rocks, that goat was, but kind of likable cute too. Lord. Oh, you know how hair smells when it's burnt. Well, that goat smelled that way too. You could see him wandering around the place smoking. If you didn't douse that thing, I guess you'd have had barbecue goat for supper. Oh, me, guess it was to be expected to find all them critters around about since Mr. Anderson was a vet. Well, the boy stayed over for a couple of days and all of at the house went out to this here restaurant that was supposed to be one of the best. Well, it sure enough was, and Jesse took a liking to their dressing for the salad, and he wanted to buy the place because they wouldn't give him the recipe for it. He swore he'd be back if it were nothing else but the dressing. Of course, they teased him about that older woman staying at the house and asked him if he'd made up to seeing her again. Oh, they know Jesse's pheromones done got to her the way she was a-acting round Jesse. He just told them they was plumb addled while they would laugh themselves silly. Oh, man. They know Jesse's pheromones could always get everything going round them women folk. Well, come morning, they decided to take off again, but before they did, they got introduced to a feller named John that knowed Mr. Anderson for years back in Pennsylvania where he come from. Now, Walter found this feller quite amazing and real interesting. John was his name. John told him that he could project himself to different places and whatnot and could find lost things too. Said he done got to project himself and ride in a spaceship with the spacemen. Well. Him and the Injuns was real friendly like, and he said they shared many a secret with him. Also said the government liked what he could do too. He was writ up in the newspaper and was on the TV and the radio a few times. Funny thing was, he was real believable where such tall tales would normally put him in a loony bin. Now old Walter listened to every word that man said. Buster liked John too, and John told him a bunch of home remedies to cure all kinds of ailments and such. Nowadays they say organic, because there ain't no chemicals on the food, but the boys never know nothing else except manure for fertilizer. But John was quite the feller, I'd say, and to make it even better to believe his yarns, Mr. Anderson vouchsafed for John. As their folks taught him, never judge a book by its cover. Well, they left there with some more new friends they liked and a place real well too that was good for bedding down. Too bad they couldn't live all the places they been. Well, John told them about a feller to meet up with on the way back south. Said he was thought to be a mad scientist, but they would find him real interesting. Walter done put his foot down and said they was going to stop and see him there at his place for sure. Reckon they didn't have nary a choice then. He done bowed up. Of course, all the boys was up for anything, and they hated on out to find that feller called George. Lord. Well, Buster drove up and down the road so many times he about needed a new set of tires. The directions to find George was a mite sketchy, to say the least. They'd come to where the road stopped, all the way to the Canadian border. Finally, with a little scouting and backtracking, they found the place. Well, it had all manner of junk in the yard, including wrecked cars and shipping containers and outhouses and ramshackle old buildings and a bulldozer and other various and sundry equipment. Just a mess, and the boys knowed their folks wouldn't allow none of that back home. Right pretty country up there, and to spoil the view and not take no pride in your land and belongings didn't sit well with the boys. Well, anyhow, John said the feller was quite different. Don't judge unless you want to be judged, as the good book says. Well, the boys all piled out the Ford and knocked up on the door. A lady answered, and they stated their business, and she told them to come on in, but take off of their shoes. Don't rightly see how it would have made much difference if the log house was a mess too. Boy. Well, George sent word that he'd be in a bit and just have a seat. Well, the boys done just that. Sitting on a stump would have been a heck of a lot more comfortable than the chairs these folks had, not to mention their old couch. Well, young'uns come a-running in and a-jabbering, and they was cute as a button. As the boys was sitting and a-waiting, Hire done seed a rat run by. Now, one of the little boys said that was his pet and friend. The hole in the wall that the critter come in was like where he could come and go as he wanted to, as he pleased, and that little feller got that rat And he was wild as he could be at doing the tricks. Now they had birds of all kinds in cages and they didn't know what all else. Well, Hired went to looking around with two of the boys and was taking it all in. Quite entertaining, them young'uns was, and smart as a tack too. The little girl says to Walter, Daddy is a-taking a bath. First one he's had in a month. Well, when George come in, you could tell he was sure freshly scrubbed. Oh, boy. I told you fellas you don't want to believe it, but it's true. His wife told the boys all he did he did his doctoring and his laboratory work. He experimented on everything, she said, even with them, and she said he done cured her of some sort of disease, and none of the young'uns ever been sick a day in their life. Fact is, he delivered them and they ain't even got a birth certificate. One of the boys was over by an old rusted up refrigerator, and Buster figured it was for storage, but did he ever get a surprise? 'Twarn't no electric power hooked up to it, but it was a running to beat the band, and Buster said, now don't that beat all? There was a little round disc stuck on the side the boy said that made it work. Well, George come in and sat right down with not much as a how to do. Guess his wife told him John sent us because he was like they knowed the man all their lives. He talked without missing a beat for about 5 hours straight, with not a word got in edgewise. He got to testing the boys' blood and showing them all manner of gadgets and doodads that was truly mind-boggling. He got to telling about them spaceships and spacemen like John did, and says to step on outside and let me show y'all something. Now he done pointed up to the sky and says, there goes one, and sure enough something went whizzing by. Oh boy. Said he'd have to leave after a while, go up on this rock and visit with him for a spell. Never heard such, the boy said. Well, George showed the boys some symbols, and whilst on their trip they ought to stop by and visit some Indians he knowed and see the same symbols there too. Told them to see an Indian named Julian. Boy, this was a-getting them out deep and real interesting to Walter and Hired. Well, Jesse and Buster was a-taking it all in with a grain of salt, but there was some proof in the pudding, they reckoned. Well, after visiting for quite a spell, George got up as the boys was a-leaving, and up gives them each a jar of some kind of powder. He said this stuff would cure up about anything, but use it wisely. Told them how to mix it, and that would clean them out real good at first, then they'd start to feeling just fine. There, the boys thanked him for his kindness, and he invited them back when they was back that away. Now this feller was a very smart feller, and he didn't pay much attention to nothing but his work, and that is why things was left undone round his place. He treated folks in them parts with doctoring and giving them doodads he invented that he couldn't that couldn't be got nowhere else, and he give it to them for free. The boys recollected, don't be judging, they was taught well. The boys lit on out of there even though it was past midnight and put some miles behind them. After all they done and seed and heard, they all agreed to turn south for home. They drove for a piece and found them a little motel that was clean, and the lady there was real nice, and her husband had just passed, so she hadn't been open for long. They hit the sack with their haze a spinning with all they done been exposed to the past few days, but this trip was once in a lifetime, no doubt about it. Lights out, one of them was already a snoring, might have known it was a toss-up who was the loudest, Buster or Walter. Well, folks, we're gonna get on down to south. That's where we're going now. Gosh, a Friday, ain't that ocean some kind of pretty, exclaimed Walter. He done took off of his cowboy boots and was a-swishing his feet in the water. Well, Hired had to get a taste of it so he could say what it was like. Well, Buster took the swimming right off and got himself some goggles to see under the water. Well, Hired was about to have a fit to see too, so Buster let him have a look-a-see through his goggles. Well, Jesse was just a-walking and a-picking up shells and a-listening to the sound of the sea and the shell. The sky didn't have nary a cloud in it, and the boys was relaxing and enjoying life. They sat for a spell in the shade and begun to rehashing what all they done see. That there Space Needle was sure something. Them buffler had Hire chomping at the bits to learn more about him, and Walter wanted to lasso one since that feller said it just couldn't be done. Now Buster wanted to jump in that Great Salt Lake and see how all it felt to float in it. Jesse had his in sights to break the bank in Reno because he figured a way to beat that there blackjack game. Well, they done eat all kind of grub and dearly loved them lobsters, and Italian food was tops too. The dim sum that the Chinaman served them was gooder than snuff, and the desserts in that French bakery would make your tongue water something fierce. The boys decided to turn a bit back east by southeast and see them Indians George told them about. Walter was having a fit. The Indian Julian was on a reservation on the Utah-Colorado border, and it wasn't that far away. They figured they'd camp out for a day or two and then head straight south. Getting there was quite the trick, for there was mule deer by the hundreds lining the roadway for miles. Had to be right careful or you would run into one of them. Well, Buster stopped at Gander Mountain and got some deer screechers to scare the deer away when you got past 30 miles an hour. Reckon they worked right well, seeing how they didn't hit none of them. The boys pulled into that fancy resort town, Park City, Utah, and got a bite to eat and bought some more souvenirs for their folks and friends. Walter talked to some of the local fellers, and they told him they was about 2 to 3 hours out of where they wanted to go. Now Buster hated on out US 40 and kept a munching on his buffalo burger that they picked up to eat a bite. His and lip smacking had the boys that was trying to nap thumping his and hay to hush up. Well, when they come into Heber City, Buster had to have a piece of pie and stopped in at the Hub. He done seed the biggest darn cinnamon roll ever and had to have one of them too. No wonder he was bigger than a bear. They began to move on up into the mountains, and it got a sight colder and snow was a-flying, but not too bad. They made their way to a place out by La Pointe called Shirley's. Now stopped there and got some directions before they went on. They was only about 12 to 14 miles from where their Indian Julian was supposed to be at, so they stocked up on a few victuals and filled the tank with gas. Well, getting on towards evening, the boys found a turn off and crossed Mosby Creek in 4-wheel drive. It got kind of sandy up on towards the top of the mountain. Then at the top it leveled out some, and there was a nice camping spot with plenty of firewood. Well, the boys pitched their tent and got them a good fire to burn and fixed up a right good little supper. That old Dutch oven wasn't to be beat, excepting with Jesse's garbage can cooking. Said if and Hire and Walter would shoot him a grouse or turkey, he'd cook it up. The boys that had Jesse's turkey before knowed it was good as snuff, boy. How good it was. Well, they made up a peach cobbler in that Dutch oven after supper and had campfire coffee with it. Well, all of them settled in, and Jesse got out his and fiddle, and Walter played his and Juice Heart, and they had a little entertainment. Well, Hire got out a jug of old McBrayer for a little taste before bed. The boys all had a water glass full with branch, and the water was from a stream coming out the mountain, and it was sweet and ice cold. About that time, a couple of fellers come by saying they seed their campfire. Jeb and Jeff was their names, and they was local boys that had been hunting over the mountain. They had all kind of tales, and Jeb says to the boys that old Bigfoot was round about there. Well, that got their attention, I'm here to tell you. Now, Jeb done took some pictures of the thing and said he sit and watched old Bigfoot for about 2 hours one time. Said he just looked at him. He just settled in on his haunches and watched 2 eagles a-playing on the ground. Jeb said he'd seen more than one, too. One was about 15 foot tall, and he could run up and down them mountains lickety-split. The others was about 6 to 8 foot tall. Well, Jeff done vouched for the story and said their people settled this land and would tell you the same thing. Now, that ain't the half of it. They got to telling about skinwalkers and spaceships and such. Said they'd showed the boys some symbols on the cliffs in the morning if they was still there. Walter done piped up and said there ain't nothing gonna scare him off. Well, yeah, Buster told Jeff and Jeb they wanted to find this here Indian Julian to get some information from him. Jeff said he knowed where to locate him and would pass the word in the morning. Buster said to tell Julian that George from up north sent him. Well, after them boys left out, Buster, Walter, Hired, and Jesse just sit a spell and talk about home and life and such. They had a pretty darn good time of it, and all of them felt blessed, but all of them agreed some of this stuff they was a-hearing just didn't sit right with what they'd been taught and knowed all their lives. Not that some of it couldn't be true, but it sure couldn't take the place of God and Jesus, that's for sure, nor the Holy Ghost. Well, sitting there by the fire in the moonlight, Buster says to the boys, "You just ain't going to believe this. Over on yonder hill, I seen a blue light. Now, when we come in, I knowed there tweren't no houses nor roads up there, just trees. Boys, I've been a-watching that light ever since we been talking, and it ain't moved not one whit." He said he thought it might be a hunter with a headlight, but he sure didn't think that was it. It wasn't that, he knew for sure. I don't know how a feller could run up and down that mountain that was straight up and down. What Buster said is that light looked like it was a-staring him right in the middle of his eyeballs and plumb through his skull. Well, just then it took off like greased lightning. Didn't just go out, it took off. "Something funny going on here," he exclaimed. Well, the rest of the boys knowed he wasn't telling no tale, and Jesse said he seed it for a minute but didn't think nothing of it. It got all the boys to thinking for sure. Well, after a while they turned in and it started to snowing. The fire burned down low and they all had their full bellies and warm sleeping bags. And little old McBrayer and they all slept like a log. Well, in the night, Walter said the next morning he heard something traipsing round about outside the tent, but marked it off as a wind or a cow or maybe a deer or something. Well, Hired said the track sure wasn't none he'd ever seen before, and there was a smell like he ain't never smelled before neither. He did see some mountain lion tracks though. There was a big one, big as his hand, and a smaller one too. Well, so the boys figured they'd all been visited by something or somebody. Right strange to say the least. Well, they ate a good hearty breakfast and then they went to exploring while waiting for word from Julian. Well, Jesse and Buster done found some Indian beads and picked up about 500 of them out of the sand to take home. Walter dearly loved to walk, so he lit out on the trail down the mountain and crossed the creek. Well, Hired went up the mountain after seeing some type of critter he ain't never seen before. Well, round about 10 o'clock, Buster and Jesse seen Hired hightailing it down that mountain. There was a big old black bear chasing him, and he was a-gaining. Well, Buster run to get his rifle, and Hired hollered not to shoot. Well, Buster and Jesse didn't know what, so Hired stopped at the creek. Now, Hired clumb up a little outcropping on a knoll and just sat there. That old bear reared up and roared with Hired just a-laughing. Well, Hired reached back, pulled out his handkerchief, plumb full of honeycomb. That there bear eased up on the Hired, licked it clean, and then ambled on off. Hired come on across the creek and told Buster and Jesse what was going on. Well, Hired come on to a beehive and figured to get some fresh honey. Well, right below him, unbeknownst to Hired, was a mountain lion with her cub. She got right upset that Hired was there and started to get all over Hired. Well, about that time, this big old black bear showed up looking for honey too. The cat and the bear met height up. A snorting and a snarling, they tangled a mite before she took off. Well, Hired done had the honeycomb, and he done enticed the bear to come on down to the mountain so they could see him. That boy. Then he give him the honey, and the bear went on back to his den to get ready to hibernate according to Hired. The boy asked him if he was scared, and he said, heck no, wasn't no need to be scared. The bear just wanted a little honey and knowed Hired weren't no threat to him. Well, the three of them decided to fix a sandwich for dinner and began to get out the makings when Hired showed up. He was all out of breath and said we had to see what he done found. Ice cave, he said. A valley the likes you never see. He was beginning to catch his breath, and we told him to sit on down after dinner, and we'd hike back on up there with him. Well, Walter said the trail doubled back and forked, and he decided to take the one going up. Said we'd better take our coats and gloves too. Walter had the old snake pistol strapped onto his leg and was still a-raring to go, but the boys got him to settle down and eat his dinner and tell him the whole story, which he did. Well, after eating, they all took off to the ice cave. It was the purest and coldest water known to man. It was on the backside of an outcropping at the top of another mountain, and a feller would get plumb breathless unless he took his time to get there. You had to hang on and swing round to get into the entrance, but it could be done safe enough with each other helping each other. It was cold enough to hang meat for sure. A natural refrigerator and freezer and plumb beautiful too. Well, when they all got out and overlooked the valley below, they could see their beautiful vista for miles and miles. There was a rock cairn there that the Indians had made. When you looked through it, you could see like a telescope. It was the most spectacular and magnificent sight of God's natural wonders and perfection and beauty that a man ever did see. Well, Walter was right. He done found a place like no other. It was plumb spiritual-like. They all bowed their heads and said a prayer right then and there. Ain't no spaceman done that, they all said. Well, after being all agog and all the boys headed on back down to camp, getting me tongue-tied. When they got there, Injun Julian sat there by the fire Injun style and just a-meditating. The boys tried not to disturb the feller, but he knowed they was a-comin' before they even seen him. He didn't have no truck, no horse, no other means of transportation, and was by himself. Now, he got up real slow-like and shook all their hands and asked if they'd like what they saw since they'd been here, especially the valley and the ice cave. Well, they asked him how in the world he knowed that, and he said, "Just like I know y'all have beads and a brother bear protected you hired." Now, ain't that something, they said. "Ain't no way you could know all that," they said, and Julian just laughed. "Sit on down and we'll talk," he said to the boys. Well, Hired put on the coffee pot and got out some snacks to serve and settled in for the discussion. Now, Julian come because John projected to him and George sent word by their friends. Now, Jesse piped up and said, "You don't mean by them spacemen and them spaceships, do you?" And Julian said yes. Well, that set them all back on their ears a bit, but Walter was plumb intrigued by all of this here tale, I'm telling you. I have to admit, Buster and Jesse had their mouths wide open, and Hired was just grinning like he done left this here earth. Now, Julian began to explain some of the many wonders and unanswered questions of the universe. When he asked them to follow him, they all got up and went to the face of a cliff about 500 yards from camp. And Julian showed them the same symbols they seen at George's place and what John told them. Then to take the cake, there was pictures, very old pictures on the rock that showed hunting scenes and six-toed giants and spacemen and spaceships. Woo-wee! The boys was completely hornswoggled by all that and knowed the proof was in staring at them right in the face. Those pictures was for real, no fake stuff here. They all sat down under the rock shelf and that protected the pictures and asked Julian questions. I'm going to stop, folks, and tell you. Old Buster's seen all that stuff. He's been there. He told them he would answer what he could, but could not tell them some things he wasn't allowed to. He wouldn't say no more about that neither. He did say that they was real special to be allowed this knowledge and they must hold it dear. He also said their friend, Jim Rogers, knowed some things about all this and trusted the boys with more than his life. He was told that he could trust them. Now that left the boys a scratching their heads, I tell you. How did he know anything about Jim Rogers? About that time, Walter and Buster jumped right in the middle of this conversation and told Julian that they believed in the Lord and Jesus and they didn't put nothing in front of him. Well, Julian was real quiet-like and says to each one of the boys, "You was placed on this earth by God for the opportunity to serve Him. You are being given special knowledge to assist you in His mission. You do not have to accept it, but He wishes that you would. He knows each and every one of you better than you know yourselves. You 4 young men have a special bond, alike but unalike, but united. Have you not seen many miracles, much proof of your faith in your living God? Have you not been afforded opportunities unimagined? Are you not blessed beyond measure? Follow him and his messengers, and you shall know. Was it not asked of each of you if you wish to know 3 times? Well, now the boys was plumb dumbfounded by all this. Julian said when they left from this place of the paranormal, their lives would be changed forever, whether or not they accepted God's mission or not. Well, each one of the boys said they wasn't going to do whatever God wanted them to do, but it was hard to believe some things. Julian said to just be open to the prompting of the heart by the Holy Spirit, no matter what form it come in. Now, Jesse and Buster weren't no naysayers, but some of this was a hard pill to swallow. And Julian told them that too. He said that it was good to examine the right path, but that it was also good to follow on faith alone. That's why all 4 of them were chosen. But Julian asked if the boys would like to attend a special ceremony the Indians held sacred, and only the chosen ones could attend. Well, of course, to a boy, they all said yeah, and Julian said, follow me. Now, the boys been all over this part of the mountain where they was a-camping and never seed what they saw now. There was a huge 5-story lodge that went down in the ground with drum beats coming up from inside with someone a-chanting. Now, Julian told the boys to strip on down to their drawers and follow him. Somehow, he just showed up in a loincloth. They followed him on into the lodge, and it was hotter than blazes in there. Julian took all the boys down to the first level and set them in front. Now, all the other Indians just stared at them with mouths open. Julian got up in front of them all and said they was the ones the Great Spirit chose for this earth, and they was brothers of the clan. Now, Harrods weren't scared of no snake, but the rattlers they let loose in there was none too friendly, it seemed. The boys started to hightail it out of there, but Julian asked them if they'd had faith. Buster said yeah, but good sense too. Well, Julian smiled at that, but just said to sit still. Well, them dang snakes was a-crawling everywhere and a-rattling up a storm. It was plumb frightful, to tell the truth. They was ready to bolt. Well, then Walter spoke up. Hold the line, boys. Hold the line. Well, that done it. They all settled down and watched the ceremony. John done come in there too. Now, how in the tarnation did he get here? Then George was a-talking. Then Jim come up into the boys a-grinning and touched each of their heads. Them snakes was a-crawling all over everybody, but they didn't feel them on their skin. That was a funny thing for sure. Then all of a sudden the drums stopped beating and all was quiet. Julian come up to each of the boys and poured something on their heads and put an amulet around each of their necks. There was some funny words spoke, and then nothing and nobody was there. There they sat in their shorts on the ground with snow beginning to fall, and it was plumb dark too. Julian, Snakes, Indians, the lodge, Jim, George, and John was all gone. The boys looked at each other and just sat there in wonder and amazement. Well, Jesse says, what was that all about? Walter spoke up and then he said, we been chose, boys. We gonna do what's right and honorable and help with all we got for our fellow man. Ain't we one accord about that? Well, why do you think we come into all this welfare just to feather our own nest? Y'all know ain't a one of us like that. Well, they all got up and dressed and talked way into the night. After breakfast the next day, they packed up and left on out. When they come off of the mountain, they run into Jeff, and he was riding his horse up towards the boys. He stopped them and told them he was awful sorry, but Julian was nowhere to be found and was sorry he didn't get the message to him that they wanted to see him. Well, the boys' eyes got wider than pie plates, and then they started to laugh. Jeff didn't know what to make of all that, and the boys said thanks anyway, and they was heading for home. Now, one thing I want to say about the boys, they ain't never thought they was better than nobody else, didn't live no rich man's life or nothing, even though they had means later on in life. Well, life began for the boys that day. As growed mid now with families and responsibilities, they still hold the line. P.S. They did stop to take Jesse four-wheeling in the sand dunes in Oklahoma and to see his Uncle Cecil in Weatherford. Y'all have a blessed day and hope y'all enjoyed the story. Old Buster signing out now.